Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Tchaikovsky's Trashiest symphonic poem. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun sometimes to listen to trash, and there are a lot of fun moments in this particular example. But trash it is. And we really need to be honest with ourselves and try to understand what trash is. Let me tell you a story. I'll tell you a little story. Back in the day, I was working on a construction project. My company had purchased out of foreclosure a partially built housing development in Queens. And one of the problems with foreclosures is that they're not usually happy occasions, and the contractors who worked on this thing hadn't been paid, and so they sabotaged the living daylights out of it. They poured concrete in the pipes. It was a horrible mess. It was going to be a big, big job. And so we hired a very illustrious, top-end name general contractor to oversee the redevelopment and reconstitution and completion of this particular edifice. Well, they turned out to be a complete calamity. They had no clue what they were doing. They were just awful, absolutely awful, even though they had the biggest name in the business and they charged top dollar to ruin our project. So we had working on staff a wonderful old Scotsman. He was absolutely delightful. He was an estimator, a cost estimator, and he was very, very, very good at his job. And he was this quiet, unassuming man. And I was having a conversation with him because he was going over the budgets. We were looking at this stuff because I was working with the bank that was financing this catastrophe. And I said to him, "Isn't it just terrible? Absolutely terrible that we have this name company, this major company, and they are complete screw-ups. They can't get out of their own way. Isn't it just a scandal?" And he said, "No, it's not a scandal." He said, "Well, it may be a scandal, but I actually appreciate them because without them, I wouldn't feel so adequate." Well, that, my friends, is the word of power. Because without trash, we would not know what the good stuff is, would we? So it pays to spend a little time discovering what the trash is and comparing it to the good stuff and seeing why the trash, however fun it may be in its trashy way, is not the good stuff. So the work in question, to come back to the point with Tchaikovsky, is a tone poem called Fatum, F-A-T-U-M, Fatum. It kind of rhymes with sputum. It's absolutely dreadful. Now, he wrote it in 1868. It had a couple of performances, one rather successful, one rather unsuccessful. He dedicated it to Balakirev, his good buddy, who, he wrote him a letter. He wrote Tchaikovsky a letter saying, "Well, I have to be honest with you and tell you that it's an absolute piece of garbage. It's formally incoherent. The ideas are impoverished, and it's really just a disgrace that you should, tear up and be embarrassed about. However, I'm so honored and touched by your dedication because I love you, man. Just keep them coming." That's what he said. I'm not kidding. You can go look it up in Wikipedia. It's in the article on this particular piece. Really bizarre. Anyway, so Tchaikovsky finally came around to Balakirev's way of thinking. Tchaikovsky hated everything he wrote, basically, almost as soon as it was done. But this particular thing he really hated because he ripped it up and threw it away. However, nothing ever stays thrown away if it's by a major composer, because either some little parasitical nobody will find your sketches and reconstitute the thing that you had tried so carefully to dispose of, thereby parasitically piggybacking on your reputation of greatness, or, as happened here, the parts survived. And so, after Tchaikovsky's death, the piece was put back together and published as Opus 77, which it most assuredly is not. It's an early work, and Tchaikovsky got a lot better after he wrote it. So, what makes Fatum such a piece of garbage? Well, basically everything. It does have a completely dysfunctional form. the ideas are completely incapable of development, and in and of themselves, while they sound like Tchaikovsky, they don't sound like good Tchaikovsky. They sound like Tchaikovsky going through the motions. But I have samples, because there's a marvelous performance here on Naxos, right here, with Theodore Kuchar and the National Symphony Orchestra of the Ukraine. This is actually, by the way, a delightful disc. It's got Tchaikovsky dances and overtures, and you get the Queen of Spades overture and the Voyevoda overture and dances from the Maid of Orleans, which is about Joan of Arc, and a bunch of also the Snow Maiden, or the something, the Slippers, or Cherevichki, or whatever that is, the Slippers. Okay. And the Enchantress and Mazeppa and the Oprichnik. Lots of dances in Tchaikovsky's operas. And so this is a very handy disc to have. You will note that on the cover here, nowhere is Fatum mentioned, but it's by far the largest thing on the disc. It's 15 minutes long amongst all these other shorter works and dances and things, but they don't mention it. And as we're about to hear, there's a good reason for that. So, without further ado, let us listen to the absolutely appalling opening, which tells you from the very first 20 or 30 seconds that Tchaikovsky has no idea where this piece is going. Here it is. Now, the opening is sort of fun, right? Boo, doo, doo, boom, chick, right? I mean, it has its character, but you can't develop it in any way. It has no potential to do anything other than repeat itself endlessly. And so that's what Tchaikovsky starts to do. I mean, just listen to that opening with the pauses, and he doesn't know, should he play it again? Should he not play it again? Should he try something else? So he does that for a little while. And then finally, it just stops, and something else starts. That something else is a glum tune, originally for bassoons, but then it tries to get happy, and there's a harp arpeggio, and that alternates for a while, and it has this terribly repetitive rhythm in the bass line. In 5 notes, it's do-do-do-do-do, something like that. Do-do-do-do-do, I don't know, it's 5 notes. It repeats over and over and over and over, endlessly, until it becomes a lyrical melody based on the same motive, which is so undistinguished and rhythmically rigid. It's like it's in a straitjacket. It's just horrible. Anyway, here is a little bit of the glum bit, followed by the lyrical melodic bit. Now, you'll listen to this and you could probably say right away, oh, it's Tchaikovsky. But it's not good Tchaikovsky. Think of all the great tunes he wrote. How does this one slot into that collection? Not terribly well. And listen for that motive, that repeated rhythmic motive that just goes on and on. Ah, terrible. Here you go. So that runs its course in a attractive but somewhat forgettable way. And then the tempo increases, and it increases into this passage full of turbulence and brouhaha. And again, it really sounds like Tchaikovsky. I mean, it sounds a little bit like the fight music from Romeo and Juliet. It's clearly Tchaikovsky. But if you compare it to the fight music from Romeo and Juliet, or the hell music in Francesca da Rimini, or any of those things, you realize that he's just going through the motions, because the melodic distinctiveness simply is not there. And when he gets sort of desperate for something to do, in comes the percussion with a pow, smash, crash, bang. And I'm a percussionist, but I get offended by stupid percussion that's like there because you got to make more noise because you don't know what to do next. That's what happens here. So let's listen to a little bit of that non-happening. Trashiness incarnate, is it not? That gets you to the first half of the piece, the first 7 or 8 minutes. So we're now at the precise middle of the work. So what does Tchaikovsky do? Where is it going to go? He doesn't know. He stops and starts all over again. He recapitulates everything we've just heard, although not entirely in the same order. So you hear the opening again, and then you hear the lyrical tune, but without that glum bassoonish thing quite as extended. And then we have the Romeo and Juliet kind of sort of turbulent music. And then that stops. And then that original glum passage that you were so happy that you would never have to hear it again, well, it comes back. And now you do have to hear it again. And that just trickles out and stops in the middle of nowhere and just gives up entirely. And suddenly the coda intervenes. And the coda, as you might expect, is our good old friend, the opening. Bum, 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 boom, crash. But harmonized in the cheesiest, most unappealing kind of way. It doesn't sound stern anymore, but it doesn't exactly sound happy. And I have to play you the whole coda because it has some big, healthy swats on the tam-tam at the end. Now, who am I not to love the tam-tam part? And I do. It's just completely useless and pointless. This ending is supposed to be kind of triumphant, but a triumph over what? I mean, Tchaikovsky called it Fatum, or fate, or destiny, or something like that. But he didn't otherwise tell us what this thing is about. And we still don't know what it's about. And when you listen to it, you realize it's not about anything. It couldn't possibly be about anything because nothing that it does makes any sense or has any expressive meaning, which is somehow traceable throughout the course of the work. So here is the unbelievably noisy and trashy coda with the fabulously pointless swats on the tam-tam. Oh my God. Yes, and with that, Tchaikovsky's Trashiest tone poems comes to its noisy, noisy ending. Now, as I said at the beginning, this does not mean you have to dislike the piece. I don't dislike it. I think it's fun. But I do think it's important that we recognize it for what it is. Play some great Tchaikovsky afterwards, and you listen to this and you just go, oh my, he had a bad day. And that's just the reality. The simple, basic reality. Not everything productive composers, and Tchaikovsky was a very prolific composer. He wrote lots of music. Not everything that he did could be wonderful. And he had the good sense to try and get rid of this one because he was embarrassed by it. So I feel that we have some sanction, some real sanction from the composer himself for agreeing with him that this is just a piece of trash. There are instances where composers, for whatever reason, have withdrawn things or disregarded things or otherwise disowned things that they've written, and they could have made a mistake. They could have been wrong. This is not one of those cases. And we know it's not one of those cases from its poverty of ideas, from Tchaikovsky's inability to develop them in any meaningful way, from the general conceptual incoherence of a piece called Fatum that we have no idea why it does what it does, and what it all means in the end. It's just a failure from every possible perspective. And that's why it's so much fun to be able to talk about it and suggest that we use it as our exemplar par excellence of the trashiest piece of music that Tchaikovsky ever wrote. So keep on listening, folks. Take care.